I'll try to entertain you for the next 15 minutes. So let me start with a story. A couple of years ago, as a Scrum Master working with a team, I started a retrospective and I expected to be a typical, great, innovative retrospective with lots of stuff going on. And a couple of team members came to me and they said, Paweł, you know what? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense. We don't see any kind of improvement out of our retrospectives. We we discover the same things over and over and again, and nothing changes. And I was like, what? We do so many improvement actions. What do you want more out of this? And we worked out the retrospective the usual way, and so I dismissed the experience, and we did some more improvement actions back then. So I kind of forgot about this until this year, when I had some kind of reflection at the end of last year, and I've decided to change something and to actually move towards measurable improvement. And back to the original story. So I believe that we as Scrum Masters are partially to blame for this kind of situations that I described. So who has experienced something like this, that there's no visual, visible, tangible results of improvement in your work? Okay, so yeah, a couple of people here. So as Scrum Masters, for example, and teams, we focus on getting those action items out of retrospectives. And if we're lucky, then we go back to those action items on the next retrospective and ask ourselves, okay, so is it done? Yes, check. Is the next one done? Yeah, great. So we're improving. And so right now, if somebody tells me that, I'm kind of not buying this. It makes me sad, because I believe that there's a better way to approach continuous improvement than just checking the action items. So I've encountered a couple of years ago again Management 3.0, and this is a part of it, and you might know it already. So basically, the idea is that experiments lead to learning, not something that we just do like the common practice, or not doing mistakes and not drawing any conclusions or learning from them, but experiments. And experiments, planning ahead, expecting an outcome, and checking the outcome at the end of the experiment. And what I did with my next teams, I've printed out this poster, and I've encouraged this kind of thinking at the beginning of the retrospective. I said, okay, the result of the retrospective will be experiment or experiments. And we shall see how we go from that. The next tool I've used, this is one of my favorite tools to use during the retrospective, is a cause and effect diagram. So when we've diagnosed some kind of problems or behaviors that are causing problems in our team, we have it in the middle here. So this is a real life example. This will be a simple example, but I will walk you through the process of creating an experiment. First, we put it here. So we had a lot of technical discussions during daily Scrum, and the cause and effect diagram consists of two parts, the bottom and the top. At least this is how I use it. And at the bottom, you have the usual root cause analysis. So you dig deeper into the reasons behind why this is happening. But on the top part of the diagram, you have the effect, the impact of the problem on your team, on your organization, something wider. So we have many discussions during daily Scrum. What does it do? It actually makes the daily Scrum longer and longer. And we also discovered that our work in progress is getting bigger. And the idea behind using this in our experiments is that at the bottom you have the things to address, so the root causes of the problem. But at the top, you have the possible measures or areas where you can apply metrics to actually measure the impact. So while doing experiments or measurable improvement, you address the root cause and you measure the impact on your system to see what's actually changing. So when we started to plan an experiment, we asked ourselves 4 things. So first of all, why are we doing this? What kind of problem are we addressing? What was the cause? What are we doing? So what's the plan for the experiment? How are we going to address the root cause? Who will drive it? Who will be the driver? Who will be the person responsible for not maybe doing all the work, but actually evaluating the whole experiment later on? And last but not least, how will we measure it or experiment? What kind of metrics will we use with the experiment? And in this real life case, we've planned 2 experiments. First one was commit and split subtasks. So to have small subtasks and to make the flow more fluent. And we expected that the cycle time for subtasks will be lower after some time. And the next experiment was that the Jira board, our sprint backlog that we've used, will be visible instead of physical board that was dead. And discussed during daily Scrum along with the sprint goal. And we expected, this is something that the team actually proposed, that the daily Scrums will be shorter. Simple metric. So the outcomes of the experiments, we've measured what we decided to measure, and the cycle time dropped from 7 days to around 2 days for subtasks, so tasks in the sprint backlog on average, and the daily Scrum duration also dropped, and from around 35 minutes to something like 12. So those are the results. As you can see, the metrics are not very complicated that we've used, like especially the daily Scrum duration. I know it's not maybe the smartest metric, maybe most meaningful. It doesn't tell you whether the daily Scrum is really of high quality and so on. But this is something that the team decided to measure, and I will go back to this in a short while. So when you get the results of the experiment, you decide what to do next. So you had planned, you did the experiment, and then you check. And then you decide whether you move on with the new way of working, or maybe you modify something, or maybe you stop doing this because the result was not something that you expected. So I've presented you with a simple mechanism with simple tools and just a simple example of how I used this, but I've used it later on with different teams with more complicated stuff, like organization-wide experiments, like bonuses and rewards systems and so on. We've always tried to plan it as an experiment and tell ourselves what are we expecting at the end. So what worked for me so far? First of all, let the team be creative, both with creation of the experiment and the metric to be used, because if you engage the team, you create ownership for the experiment and for the metric itself. So the metric that I've presented you, the daily Scrum duration, is something that the team invented, and they continued to update it long after I was no more their Scrum Master, and they evolved it, they modified it, and so on. So they took ownership of this metric. At the same time, as a Scrum Master, for example, you will probably need to gather some additional data. So if you use kind of any kind of a system that lets you gather data automatically, like Jira, you will have lots of additional data. Use it, keep it in the background. Don't flood the team with the metrics all the time. But sometimes you will need this to correlate the data. If you're into system thinking, you will want to maybe check what kind of other parts of the system you're affecting with your experiments, and maybe you want to verify. Okay, so if my daily Scrum is getting better, does it affect, for example, my predictability of the sprints, or maybe kind of a value delivered to the customer? So you can correlate the data with something else, and if needs arises, you can present it to the team. A simple question that helped me a lot, not only with experiments. It brings to mind this kind of thinking about the future. So how will we know that it will actually help? So what kind of problems will it solve that we'll see? How will we actually present it? How can we prove in the future that this kind of action will actually solve our problems? So naturally, it's starts a discussion about some kind of a metric, success criteria. And in the end, don't go overboard with the metrics. So on one hand, don't flood the team with a lot of data that they are not maybe ready to analyze at the point of time. And on the other hand, if you apply a wrong metric to experiment, you can get wrong results, or maybe not really see the change. For example, if you plan a small experiment, as we did, and correlate it with, I don't know, revenue growth or return on investment of the whole project, then you won't see the change. So you need to apply the right metric, not too wide or too narrow, to the experiment that you're actually conducting. And in my opinion, and my experience, what I've seen so far during this year, when you provide metrics, data, facts, it builds trust. It builds trust that you are actually getting things done, that you're improving. Builds trust in the team, confidence between stakeholders, and also from the business. So you can provide information and proof that the time we spend for continuous improvement process, like retrospectives, this time actually makes sense. This is an investment that provides some results. Okay, thank you very much. You can find me here, also on Agile Wrocław, and Agile on the Boat 2nd edition next year. Thank you.